I really am glad to be here today to join with the American Federation of Teachers as we work together believing in the possibilities of America. I bring you greetings from the North Carolina NAACP, the Moral Movement, Monday Movement down south in North Carolina, where we are fighting against the fresh expression of extremism. And we are standing together, black and white and brown, Asian, Native American, young and old, labor, business, workers, LGBT and straight, people of different faith, standing together, saying that we will go forward together and not one step back. We are fighting for 5 principles. We believe that economic sustainability, labor rights, living wages, and addressing poverty is still possible. We are fighting for educational equality for all because we believe it's still possible. We are fighting for health care for all, protecting Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and the Affordable Health Care Plan because we believe that caring for our sick is still possible. We're fighting to address the disparities in the criminal justice system because we believe it is possible. And we are fighting to protect and expand voting rights and civil rights and women's rights and immigrant rights because we believe it is possible. And that like the 5 fingers of the hand, those 5 principles pull us together. Down in North Carolina, we quote a scripture often in the movement. It says, "We are not of those," Hebrews 10:39, "who shrink back unto destruction, but we are those who persevere unto the salvation of the soul." Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. As I come here today to join with AFT and your president, Randy Weingarten, I want you to know I'll join her again on Tuesday at the Supreme Court, where we stand against new possibility of new laws to allow more ungodly money into our political system. And then I'm going to stand with her again at the rally for immigration rights. And then after that rally, I plan to join her in another act of civil disobedience as we stand with our brown brothers and other immigrant brothers and sisters. It's time that we put our bodies where our mouths are. Now, I'm drawn, Randy, to the depth of what it means that you and I, what we represent when we stand here together, and how even this program was put together to model what it means to work together, because if you're going to work together, you must hear different voices from different places, all headed in the same direction. Think about it. I'm here, an African American, part Native American with white ancestry, a Southern preacher, trained theologian, and NAACP president from the Deep South. She is a woman who is Jewish, who is gay, who's a union leader, a teacher, and a lawyer. But when we stand together, our diversity is our strength. That's right. And it is the kind of strength that can transform a nation. And it is the kind of strength that causes those who believe in a more homogeneous view of life to tremble in their boots. Our unity represents the kind of unity that can help this nation move towards being more closely what it promised us on paper. So I was moved as I came here today. I've been thinking, I do that sometimes on the plane. I've been thinking about what this nation needs to do. And I found what we need to do, if you will, crafted in the acronym that describes your organization. And I want to suggest today, if I was in a classroom, I'd be teaching your ABCs, but I want to suggest today that we need to teach this nation how to do the AFT. What is doing the AFT? Well, first, we need to take the A and assess where we are in history. We are not just in a political moment, my friends. And if you go at it like that, you're going to miss it, and you're going to get into these transactional relationships just until the next election. And if it turns out all right, then we're going to separate one more time. But this is not just a moment between Democrats and Republicans. We're in a moment of deep transformation. We're in a soul-changing moment as a nation. We're in a moment where we have to do some real thinking about where we're headed. Some of you have heard me say it before, but I repeat it today, that we're in a moment of national reconstruction. Walk with me for a moment. The first reconstruction in this nation happened between 1868 and 1898, when blacks and progressive whites in the South came together and they worked to get rid of the vestiges of slavery. They rewrote constitutions all over the South. They brought into being the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendment. Nearly 100 years ago, they crafted state constitutions, black and white people working together, that guaranteed voting rights and guaranteed public education as a right in the South 145 years ago for all people of all colors. They guaranteed labor rights. One of the first great labor movements was down in New Orleans, where blacks and whites working on the levee came together and demanded living wages before the turn of the century. But you also must remember that Reconstruction, I don't have time to go through it all, but that Reconstruction was vehemently opposed by those who believed in going backwards. It was attacked by those who wanted to deconstruct the nation rather than build it for all people. It was met by those who could not stand to see America moving a little closer to her ideals. So they called themselves the Redeemers Movement. They took a biblical word and named it to try to cover up their hypocrisy. And they said that the Redeemers Movement, which is the precursor of the Tea Party, excuse me, I'll get to that later. The Redeemers Movement said in 1872, as they hooked up with the Klan and the red shirts, they said, our goal is to redeem America from the influence of black and white fusion coalition. They said their motto was, we must take back America. They attacked voting rights first. Then they attacked educational rights secondly. Then they attacked labor rights. They attacked criminal justice rights. And as my friend Derek will tell you, they attacked economic rights and fairness in the economic system. We've seen it before. Yes, they went all out to stop the first Reconstruction, and they did. But the people kept hoping and believing. And then in 1954, with the Brown versus Board of Education decision that went against Freddie Koch, who's the daddy of David and Charles Koch. The Brown versus Board of Education decision was a direct assault on the Freddie Koch money and the John Birch Society. Ended separate but equal, that ruling in 1896. And we see the phase, another phase of a reconstruction from 1954 to 1968. And what did we see in that period? We saw the promise of Social Security being opened up to people who were in the agrarian community and to domestics. We saw Medicaid. We saw the 1963 March on Washington, labor and civil rights coming together in a powerful way, not to sing Kumbaya, but to fight for jobs and justice and economic power. We saw young people activated. We saw black and white coming together. We saw Latinos being welcomed in the movement. We saw the 1964 Civil Rights Act that not only helped African Americans, but helped women. We saw the 1965 Voting Rights Act that not only helped black people, but white women couldn't even sit on juries until the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed. Change, reconstruction was happening. And once again, the forces of regression and extremism said, we do not want this kind of America. And so they used all kinds of strategy. They got in a room, they spent their money, and they said, how can we take the Goldwater mail list and teach them how to talk race and division without sounding divisive? So they came up with a new lexicon. Cutting taxes meant undermining the ability of the government to create programs that could foster economic power. Urban became the new word for, well, I can't say it here, but it's an N-word. Forced busing became the way to defy Brown. Law and order became the new code word for putting those black and white and Latino young people in their place. Kevin Phillips spent money and strategizing, developing something called the White Southern Strategy. Told Richard Nixon, you gotta run on George Wallace's platform, but you can't act like George Wallace, because in 1954 we knew how to get. They said we knew how to get elected. We just used the N-word as much as possible. But by 1964 you couldn't use the N-word, so you have to learn the way to talk race without talking race. And Lee Atwater in 1976 in a video spilled the beans on all of them. Look it up on the internet. He talked about how they developed this new way of talking about race without talking about race. And so it happened again, an attack on voting rights, attack on educational rights, attack on labor, and an all-out attack on our leaders, killing them, white and black, even presidents. So-called white Southern strategy found a way to cause white people all over the country, particularly out in the South, to work against and vote against their own best interests. And the movement was depressed. Ronald Reagan went down to Mississippi and held one of his first campaign stops, where Swanner, Cheney, and Goodman, your uncle, was killed. And he went down there. He didn't have to say anything. He just went to Miss Philadelphia and announced he was running for president. And that was symbolic to everybody that no more Reconstruction. And then something begins to happen in 2008. A new electorate bursts a president that looks like the people who were the slaves that built the White House. God created a Kansas-Kenyan connection. And made sure they had sex and the birth in America. And then God did something. You know, August 28th was when Emmett Till was killed. And August 28th was the March on Washington. And then August 28th was the day Barack Obama accepted the nomination. Nobody but God could line up history like that. And I believe that right now we're seeing the makings. We're in the middle of a third Reconstruction. So much is possible with the new demographics and the new energy and the new electorate. I believe that there are forces deeply afraid of this new demographic and new electorate and the possibility of changing elections and public policy all across the country, especially in the South. We are in the middle of a Reconstruction that will fundamentally change this nation. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on voting rights. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on union rights. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on public education. And that's why we're seeing the resegregation of our schools. They are afraid of you. That's why we're seeing such an attack on the president. That's why we're seeing people even willing to shut down the government, do not care, do not want people to have opportunity. Have you ever seen anything so damn crazy in your life? Yeah, I'm a cussing preacher. Have you? And I got chapter and verse for it, because there was a fig tree one day and it wasn't working right. It shut down. It didn't produce any fruit, and Jesus damned it too. Something ought to be damned. And when you get elected by the people, and based on your election, you get free health insurance, and then you don't want other people to have, y'all might as well say it, that ought to be. And the reason they don't want this health care thing to work is because when it works, it's going to make a connection to people that your vote really does matter. You know, that if you vote, you might live. That voting goes with living like collard green goes with fried chicken. Y'all with me? Y'all feel me? And if folk figure that out, they ain't gonna never stop voting. And so that's why they want to deconstruct. They want to stop it, because hope is a powerful force. So the first thing you got to do if you're going to do the AFT, you got to assess where we are in history. You got to understand where we are and why we were born. That this is not a battle against Democrats and Republicans. It's a battle against extremism versus those who believe in the Constitution. It's a battle for the soul of this nation. It's a battle of right versus wrong. Now, once you get the A straight, then you got to go to class and you have to take the F. And the F in your own acronym, I use it tonight to stand for forming alliances. See, if we understand we're being fought because of how strong we are, then the fight should motivate us and not depress us. The fight itself should motivate us to stay together and work together and pull together. Because change always comes in America when we find a way to come together around common good and common ground. We are not being fought because we are weak. We are being fought because when you build a broad coalition, then you have the ability to shake up things, and narrow-minded extremists understand that. They know their time is limited. I wish, because I have no hatred for any human being, I believe in the redemptive possibility of all people. I wish they could be freed from their fear. I wish they could be freed from their regression. I wish they would use their power to lift people up and bring people together. My, what a beautiful thing it would be. But they tell me that Tea Party tea has an hallucinating effect. They tell me, I haven't drank it, but I've heard. And they tell me if you sniff too much coke, K-O-C-H, it'll do a job on you. And they tell me if you sell out to the highest bidder, the prostitutes got to do what the pimp says. And if you're doing all of that, drinking the tea, sniffing the coke, and selling out, it's hard to do right. I hope they will get free. But if they choose not to be free, you and I can't be bound. We must be free enough to work together, and we cannot be lured into thinking that we must be divided or be depressed. Shake your neighbor and say, don't you dare be depressed. Now finally, not only must we assess where we are in history, not only must we take the F and form true alliances, we must take the T and tell the truth. If there is one thing we learned in the Moral Monday movement, it is that when you move away from the limited language of liberal versus conservative and Democrat versus Republican, because, you know, I'm liberal and conservative, depending on whether I'm using ketchup or hot sauce. I mean, you can't trap me in language. You hear what I'm saying? I believe I'm a Christian conservative. I believe the other folk are Christian liberals. Because if the main emphasis of the Bible is how you treat the poor and love your neighbor, and if you're always talking about God, but you say more about what God says the least about, and you say the least about what God says the most about, you're not a conservative. I'm a conservative because I want to conserve justice. I want to conserve righteousness. I want to conserve love. I want to conserve treating people right. Don't let nobody You don't allow anybody to trap you in language. We got to move away from liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. And when you start focusing on some truths that are deeper than that, values that are more noble than that, you start finding out that truth, telling it, has a way of setting people free from the narrow confines. You know, we've been doing Moral Mondays, Randy, about 20 weeks. And after the 13th week, we left Raleigh, went down. I was invited to a place called Mitchell County. I think Roz set that up. She called them up there and told them to send for me. Now, Mitchell County is 99% white and 89% Republican. And it's right on the corner of Tennessee, right near where the Klan was founded. And I used to be human relations director, so Brother Wong, I know all the states. I used to monitor hate crimes and hate groups. We have more in North Carolina active than Mississippi. And they sent me an invitation to come to Mitchell County. We'd had 13 weeks of Moral Monday, 900 some people arrested, 15,000 people in Raleigh. And they sent word for me to come to Mitchell County. They said, are you going? I said, hell no, I ain't going. I mean, that's what I said. They don't need to lie. That's exactly what I said. Confession is good for the soul. And then one of the elders in the movement, in fact, one of the white guys in the movement, a guy named Vernon Tyson. The book, Blood Doesn't Sign My Name, is about him being a white minister in Oxford, North Carolina, during the time of uprising. He said to me, Barber, and he's one of my spiritual counselors, he said, you got to test what you believe, son. I said, in Mitchell County? I said, 1920, they ran all the black folk out of Mitchell County. He said, you got to test what you believe. So I preached real hard that Sunday morning, like I wasn't going to come back to my own pulpit. I kissed my wife, hugged my children, got in the car. We went up to Mitchell County. Off Highway 40, up the mountain, you can't get back down, it winds around. 99% white, 89% Republican. Got out of the car at 6 o'clock, about dusk dark. Saw all these folk, none of them looked like me. They said, hey, Come on in. We walk into this Episcopal church. You can look at it online. And they start singing, "Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love." Then they looked at me and said, "Reverend, we didn't come here to talk about Democrat or Republican. In fact, most of us are Republican. We came here to talk with you about some truths that are bigger than labels." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, we're not like those Republicans down in the current state house. We don't even understand them. We're more like Lincoln Republicans. We're more like the Republicans that signed off on the Voting Rights Act in 1965. I know that history. He said, they're extremists because anytime you use your power to hurt people, that's extreme. They said, we want to talk about why public education is important and why it is the truth that we must save teacher jobs, and why up here in these mountains that matters, because the only way for our children to get off these mountains is through public education. The truth set us free. They said not only that, we want to talk about taking care of people, because that's the truth. Up here in these mountains, we believe when somebody's down, you ought to take care of them. You shouldn't cut their unemployment benefits. And we want to talk about labor rights, because the railroads have left here and the textile mills have gone, and all of them are gone because we had no labor protection. We had no union protection. And we understand that truth. We want to talk about voting rights and why voting rights are so important and special for those, especially those of us up here in the mountains, because oftentimes we are dismissed by other people. We want to talk about the truth about health care and why it's important for people to have decent health care. And then they said, we want to talk about what Jesus did, the truth, when he turned over the money changer and would not let the people who had the money determine the political policy, the public policy. They said, we want to talk about justice. Let's talk about truth. I said, let's do it. And for 3 hours in Mitchell County, none but 3 black folk in a room in the county, 99% Republican, 89% Republican, 99% white. We talked about justice. We strategized about justice in telling the truth. The truth set us free. Now, I came by to tell you not what I've heard, but what I know now. That if we focus on truth, if we focus on moral issues, the real issue, not this foolishness about prayer in the school, ain't a scripture in the Bible about that. Not this foolishness about homosexuality, because your sex life and your relationship life is between you, your God, your priest, and your pastor. But let's talk about the real moral issue. Education is a moral issue. Voting rights is a moral issue. Health care is a moral issue. Criminal justice reform is a moral issue. Fair tax policy, that's a moral issue. When I was hungry, did you feed me? That's a moral issue. When I was sick, did you care about me? That's a moral issue. Now I come by, when we focus on these truths, the more noble ideals we can come together. Telling the truth up there in the mountains, we found out that there's not a lot of difference between mountain populism and civil rights activism. My God. In fact, that night they asked me to lead them on a march in the middle of the night to the home of the Tea Party Republican that they're going to put out. It was at that point I did have to say, now white folk, y'all done gone a little bit too crazy now. I said, we'll come back and do that during the day. But I've come to tell you that by assessing where we are in history, by forming alliances, and by telling the truth, doing the AFT, we can build the movement in this country that can turn back this extremism all over this country for the whole world to see it. But let me tell you, you won't build it from Washington, D.C. down. I got to say that to all my national folk. You got to refix how you work. If you want to build this movement, you've got to empower those from the bottom. Movements are built from Montgomery up, from Jackson, Mississippi up, from Raleigh, North Carolina up. And if we build state movements grounded in an awareness of where we are, forming alliance, telling the truth, rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values, focused on state capitals, led by the indigenous leaders of that state. If we understand that those state movements are national movements with state movements with national implication, and especially down in the South, we can break open the walls that have divided us. And when that happens, we'll see some things like never before. But I'm going to my seat, but I got to be a preacher 1 minute. I didn't fly 5 hours backwards not to finish what I got to say. It'll be all right. Because there's one other truth we have to focus on, and that is the truth that oftentimes the greatest moment is when you find yourself in the greatest battle. I've been looking at the fact that we've seen the greatest attack on voting rights since the 19th century in Jim Crow. This U.S. Congress brand of extremism is willing to take the country down because they don't want everybody to be lifted up. We're seeing the greatest attack on public education, and we're seeing a new use of neighborhood schools to resegregate our public schools. We see billions of dollars being taken from the poor people just because some folk want to be mean, don't even want poor people to eat. It seems like when I think about it, sometimes I have to remind myself that whenever somebody is fighting progress like this, the truth that you have to tell and focus on is that we've come too far. We've been through too much. We've cried too many tears. Too many people have sacrificed. Too much to make America. There's been too much progress. And there's no way we're going to stand for going back now. The truth is, every generation has a calling. And we must decide if we're going to accept our call in this moment. So I stopped by there, Los Angeles, to tell you this is no time to turn back. No time for us to be weak-kneed. It's time for us to come together. I want to tell you a truth as I go to my seat. The truth is that when you hold on to the truth about justice, justice has never lost. I didn't hear it, but I'm going to help you here. I didn't say justice didn't get beat down. I didn't say justice didn't get fought. I never said justice doesn't get bruised, but I believe that justice has never ultimately lost, and I'll stand on that. Why? Just look back in history. In slavery, it looked like justice had lost. But then injustice met Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and they want nothing but the truth. Injustice met white abolitionists that came together with the truth about justice, and they beat back the lies of slavery. Justice has never lost. Women didn't have the right to vote, and it looked like justice had lost, but then women came together. Sojourner Truth and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they came together, and they told the truth about justice, and they won their rights. Justice has never lost. Looked like Jim Crow beat down justice, and justice couldn't rise again. But then people like Rosa Parks and Martin King and so many others, black and white, decided to stand in the truth about justice and tell the truth and dream about the truth and fight for the truth and be willing to sacrifice for the truth. And justice overcame injustice. And since I'm a preacher, I understand that I have a different kind of logic than some folk. Pharaoh looked like he had all the power. Looked like he had all the power in the world. And then he met Moses. Moses couldn't talk much, but he knew how to speak truth. And Pharaoh was brought down and justice was lifted up. Goliath looked like he had all the power in the world. Then little David stood on the truth about justice. And when the dust was cleared, Goliath was down and justice was lifted up. Nebuchadnezzar looked like he had all the power in the world, so much power that he threw 3 little boys in a fiery furnace. Somebody called them Shadrach, Meshach, and that bad Negro. Closed the door. He thought it was all over. But when the smoke cleared, injustice was down and justice was standing. I could go on and on through the corridors of history, but I declare to you a truth today. We might have to fight right now in America. We might have some battles right now in America. We might see some crazy extremists right now in America. But the truth is, justice will win. I heard my grandmama say it. I didn't understand it when she first said it. But now I've lived long enough. Now I've come back from being crippled when they said I would never walk again. And I understand what grandmama meant when she said weeping may endure for a night. Government shutdowns may endure for a night. Tea parties may endure for a night. Meanness may endure for a night. Hateful folk may endure for a night. But joy still comes in the morning. Justice will win in the morning. When we all get together, we'll win in the morning, in the morning, in the morning, in the morning.